he starts off, as any good author would, with an anecdote. And he talks about how it was his job to collect information about inscriptions, and his job was to log Greek inscriptions in major urban centers throughout the ancient Mediterranean. So he did this as supplementary income to his adjuncting. And then one day, he and his friend Dale Allison went and traveled to one of the cities that Bart had done some database work on. He had this sort of eureka moment. So I'll start reading for you at the top of page 49. You can see it there in the orange. And it hit me. The time when Christianity arose with its exalted claims about Jesus was the same time when the emperor cult had started to move into full swing with its exalted claims about the emperor. Christians were calling Jesus God directly on the heels of the Romans calling the emperor God. Could this be a historical accident? How could it be an accident? These were not simply parallel developments. This was a competition. Who was the real God-man? And so you begin to see here, as the reader, you begin to see how Bart wants to lead the reader along into this idea that the Jews almost manufactured this belief that Jesus is Lord. Not Caesar, but Jesus is Lord. There is this competition between the two, and this sort of explanatory pursuit. While there's some value to it, you do get the sense that Bart is trying to be a little reductionistic here. That if we could come up with an explanation for how the early Christian Jews came to believe that Jesus was God, then we could see how it is that they were mistaken. So you do get that sense. And there will be a few things here throughout this chapter that will give you that sense. At least it did for me. But if you're reading along, I'd be happy to know what were your thoughts. At the bottom of 49, so I started thinking about divine humans within Judaism. Here was the immediate enigma. Jews, unlike their pagan neighbors, were monotheists. They believed in only one God. How could they say that Jesus was God and still claim that there was one God? If God was God and Jesus was God, doesn't that make two gods? I realized that I needed to do some research into the matter to figure it out. Continuing on, let me read this paragraph from the bottom of 50. Saying what Jews thought is itself highly problematic, since a lot of different Jews thought lots of different things. It would be like asking what Christians think today. Someone may well say that Christians believe that Christ is fully divine and fully human. And that would be true, except for those Christians who continue to think that he really was God and was human only in appearance. Or for those Christians who think that he was an inordinately religious man but was not really God. You can pick almost any doctrine of the Christian church and find lots of people who identify themselves as Christians thinking something different from what other Christians think about. Why did I highlight this passage? Well, he's correct that you can find a variety of beliefs if you go and survey different Christians. But I want you, the reader, to observe something here. That Bart will categorize any person, either present or ancient, who self-identified as a Christian, and then say that their view represents a part of the whole and not some other group. So you'll see him do this right here. He does it. You'll see him do this regarding what Jews believed, because there were other Jews, this and that. Here's why this is, I think, concerning. Even from a sociological perspective, it's not always the case that someone who self-identifies actually belongs in a group. There is something called self-deception where people think they're one thing, but really they're not. And one way you can deduce that is by analyzing their beliefs against what the group as a whole believes. So, for example, if someone calls themselves a Christian, but they don't go to church on Sunday, they think Jesus is this good moral teacher, but they don't actually read what he teaches, they don't follow what he teaches, so on and so forth, you already get the gist here, that this person is simply calling themselves a Christian because perhaps it's the cultural thing to do. It's culturally acceptable. Or someone doesn't want to be shamed for, not saying they're a Christian. I think we need to go beyond this metric of self-identification, and we need to dig deeper. Why is this a concern to me? Well, I've read some of Bart's other works. I read a book called Lost Christianities, and he does the same sort of thing. He talks about these lost versions of Christianity, aka some of these were heretical, some of these were these weird sects, S-E-C-T-S, some of these were really strange cults. There was even in one part of the book, there was a sex cult that people call themselves Christians, but they would have sexual orgies. So Bart calls that a Christian group. It's just so clear to someone who is a devout believer that Jesus is Lord that that stuff happening over there in that no longer existing group, that ain't Christian, okay? We should be able to recognize where the fences of orthodoxy belong. Bart doesn't do that. He doesn't do that with regard to Christianity, and he doesn't do that with regard to ancient Judaism. So anybody who self-identifies as a Jew for the ancient Judaism group he's looking at, or a Christian, he says, okay, you belong. So that's one major critique I have of his methodology here. Another reason why we should be concerned about that is because you might have a small sliver of that population that you are thinking is almost representative. Well, some believe this, some believe that. Well, what if it's 0.001%? Then you might start exaggerating these claims. Well, some Jews thought this, but it's 0.001%. Why not talk about what the majority believe? Or even the vast majority in this case? I think there's some sneakiness happening here when that sort of thing occurs.